Okay, so who wants to, I guess, give me in their own words your definition of positive reinforcement just as a review from last week?
The behavior you want to see increase.
Yep, so adding some type of stimulus to the environment to increase the behavior. Yep, that's positive reinforcement. What about negative reinforcement?
Removal of a stimulus, aversive stimulus.
Yeah, the removal of an aversive stimulus in order to increase some type of behavior. And then with negative reinforcement, you always want to think about hashtag relief. It's causing some type of relief. So that means that you were in an aversive situation and then you got out of it in some way. And we talked about the difference between avoidance and escape. Okay, and then what about positive punishment?
When you add a stimulus to decrease the behavior.
Yes, perfect. We're adding some type of stimulus, aversive stimulus, right? Something that they don't want. So like a spanking, a reprimand, some type of aversive to decrease the behavior. And the negative punishment would be?
Something taken away to decrease the behavior.
Yeah, so taking away a wanted stimulus in order to decrease the behavior. Perfect. All right, so that was our little summary of chapter 2's reinforcement and punishment. So then we go on to page 38, which starts talking about unconditioned reinforcement and punishment. So an unconditioned reinforcer, who can tell me what unconditioned means?
Something that is natural, something that is genetic, such as feeling cold or feeling warm.
Yeah, so like unconditioned, I always think of things that are unlearned. And those, they also call them, so when you guys are studying for your exam, you're gonna wanna know all of the AKAs. So who can tell me what an AKA for a unconditioned reinforcer is?
Reflex.
I think they call it primary, right? Who's heard of it as a primary reinforcer? Primary and secondary? Have you guys heard those?
Yes.
Yes, so your primary reinforcers are the same thing as your unconditioned reinforcers. And so those are things that are unlearned, things that are naturally reinforcing to us as humans. So like food, water, sex, all of those things that are biologically necessary. Okay, I muted her. Hi, Peace. How are you? Okay, cool. So yeah, so unconditioned, we're gonna think about primary reinforcers, things that are biologically necessary for us to function as humans.
Is unlearned reinforcer another one?
Yeah,
Or AKA?
unlearned.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Yep, perfect. So you're gonna always want to know all of those AKAs. And I think on the study group, they have a cool mock that's from Bill, that he has like an AKA mock. So before I took my exam, I took that mock a couple times just so that I would know all of the AKAs, so I wasn't thrown off by the different words. But yeah, so that's going to be your unconditioned reinforcers. So then it goes on to talk about motivating operations and deprivation. So that's going to be your MO, and it's going to be talking about depriving certain unconditioned reinforcers. So what can be an example of manipulating your MO in the form of deprivation that can help us to change the value or the worth of your reinforcer? So like in the book, they put an example of food deprivation. So what would become a motivating operant if I deprived somebody of food?
Hunger.
Hunger. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hunger. You hear me?
Yeah, so because they're hungry, now food has become more motivating or whatever. So that's when they start talking about motivation and deprivation as far as unconditioned reinforcers. And then it goes on to talk about unconditioned punishers. Is a stimulus change that decreases the future occurrence of any behavior that precedes it without prior pairing with any other form of punishment. Unconditioned punishers include painful stimulation that can cause tissue damage. So virtually any stimulus to which an organism's receptors are sensitive, so light, sound, and temperature, can be intensified to the point that its delivery will suppress behavior, even though the stimulus is below levels that actually cause tissue damage. Does anybody have anything to add or anything that they learned or any light bulb moments that they had from reading about unconditioned reinforcement and punishment? Or those are pretty like self-explanatory?
I think I confused Punisher with Reinforcer with my example, because I think I said reacting to warmth and cold. But I don't know.
Oh, yes. So, yes, I think so. Your example is more like a punisher, whereas the reinforcers are things of value. So like the food, water, sex, all of those are going to be your reinforcers, whereas the punishers are going to decrease the occurrence of the behavior that precedes it. Okay. So I guess we can keep on moving from there. Okay, so now it goes into conditioned reinforcers and punishers. So now on the opposite side, what is conditioned? So we talked about unconditioned being unlearned. So what would be something that is conditioned?
Something that is learned.
Anything learned?
Yes. Anything that was learned. So conditioned means that it was learned. We talked about unconditioned being primary, and then conditioned is going to be your secondary. So your secondary are going to be things that are learned. So that means that you have come into contact with some type of consequence, and so now it's changed my behavior. So because I've come into contact with this consequence paired with this behavior, I'm no longer going to engage in that, or I'm going to continue to engage in that behavior because of some type of learned history. Okay, does anybody want to go into like more detail about the difference between unconditioned and conditioned reinforcers and punishers?
Yeah, can we go over the reinforcer and punisher?
Yes, so reinforcer is going to be, we're going to increase the likelihood of that behavior occurring in the future, whereas the punisher is going to decrease the likelihood of that behavior occurring in the future. Did you want conditioned or unconditioned reinforcement punishment?
I guess both.
Okay, so in the book it says, while unconditioned reinforcers and punishers are critically important and necessary for survival, relatively few behaviors that consume that everyday routine of people as they go about working, playing, and socializing are directly controlled by such events. For example, although going to work each day earns the money that buys food, eating that food is far too delayed for it to exert any direct operant control over the behavior it earned. Remember, behavior is most affected by its immediate consequence. Sorry. Learning your multiplication table as conditioned. Drinking water when you are thirsty is unconditioned. Okay, Olga gave us a good example. So learning your multiplication table is something that's conditioned, but drinking water when you are thirsty is unconditioned. Okay. So the difference between the reinforcer and punisher is it's either going to increase the value or decrease the value, or increase the future likelihood or decrease the future likelihood. And then just know the difference between conditioned, was it learned or is it an unlearned? And if it's unconditioned, it's usually going to be one of those primary reinforcers or primary needs. Thank you, Olga. She said she loves my shirt. All right, well, I hope I didn't confuse you guys about the differences between conditioned and unconditioned. So then page 40, it goes on to talk about the discriminated operant and three-term contingency. So remember last time we talked about ABC being very similar to the SRS model. So now it's going to break down the SRS. So your antecedent stimulus, your behavior, and your consequence. So your A, B, and C. And then you're going to want to look at, did it increase the likelihood of the behavior occurring in the future, or did it decrease the likelihood of that behavior occurring in the future? And then it goes into talking about discriminative stimulus. So who can tell me what an SD is?
Signal for either reinforcement or punishment. It's a signal.
Yes, the SD is a signal, and it's signaling what?
Possible reinforcement or punishment.
Reinforcement. So your SD is signaling that reinforcement is available. And so I always give the example of the mermaid sign, the Starbucks mermaid, right? So Selena's driving to work every day, and then she sees that Starbucks mermaid. So to me, that's an SD. That is signaling that reinforcement is available. So I engage in some type of behavior, skirt into the parking lot, and I get myself a coffee. So I engaged in that behavior because I saw my SD that tells me, Selena, reinforcement is available here. So that's my SD. On the other hand, you can talk about S deltas. Those are also antecedents. So S delta is going to signal what?
Reinforcement's not available.
Yes.
The opposite. Yeah.
Yeah, reinforcement is unavailable. And I love to give this example. So on my keys, on my house keys, I have my key and then I have my mom's key. They're both the same brand. And so they both go into the hole, but only one of them is going to open my door. And I don't know why I haven't put like some type of signal to tell me which one is which. So every time I get to my door, I'm like having to shove both of the keys in there. And then I'm like, my ABA brain is always like, SD is Delta, SD is Delta. Where's my SD? So I can get into my house. So that's like a good example that differentiates the difference between SD and S Delta. So the SD signals reinforcement is available. S Delta is going to signal that my reinforcement is not available. And they are both antecedents. Okay. A behavior that occurs more often under some antecedent condition than it does under others is called a discriminated operant. Because a discriminated operant occurs more often in the presence of a given stimulus than it does in the absence of that stimulus, it is said to be under stimulus control. So the key that actually opens the door to my house, that one has established stimulus control over the behavior. And so now I know this key is going to get me in, this key is not. So I always like to give my brain examples like that to help me make sense of things. So I hope that was helpful. So we talked about SD as Delta, the three-term contingency being the same thing as ABC. So the first antecedent is going to be your S, then your behavior is going to be your R, and then your consequence is going to be your S. Antecedent, behavior, consequence, sometimes called the ABCs of behavior. It shows the three-term contingencies in this little chart on page 41. And it gives us some examples for all of the different types of reinforcement and punishment. So in this example, our SD, or our first S, our antecedent stimulus, is going to be name a carnivorous dinosaur. The behavior or the response is the child says Tyrannosaurus Rex. Consequence was, well done. So he received social praise. So we added some type of wanted stimulus to the environment, and then it increased the behavior. So that one is an example of positive reinforcement. So over here, the next one is going to be, there's a foul smell under, oh, okay, how about, I have an idea. Who can give a real life example of positive reinforcement? Yes, SRS is the same as ABC.
And what was your question? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying if somebody could give a real life example of positive reinforcement, I guess maybe something for you or something that you use for your kids to increase a behavior.
Yes. When my son's room is messy, he loves ice cream. So if he cleans his room, I take him to Andy's to buy his favorite chocolate ice cream. So that increases him cleaning his room without me telling him.
Yeah, perfect. So she has a contingency that's previously been set. So her son knows that if he cleans his room, he gets to go for ice cream. So yes, that is a perfect example of positive reinforcement. Who can tell me the difference between reinforcement and a bribe? That's always my favorite question when people ask me.
A bribe is
Oh.
something you present while the behavior is occurring. When reinforcement is a reinforcer is something you present before the behavior occurs.
Yes, kind of. So a bribe is given before reinforcement. I mean, before the behavior, and reinforcement is given after the behavior. So a bribe would be if Erica told her son, hey, I'm going to give you this ice cream if you clean your room. And so she gives him the ice cream and then he cleans his room. That's no longer reinforcement. Now she's just bribing him. But since she set the contingency prior, so she has an expectation, she's like, hey, if you clean your room, then you get ice cream. So once he completes the behavior of cleaning his room, then she gives him the ice cream. So then it becomes reinforcement. And when you guys become a BCBA, your RBTs will try to like challenge you and be like, oh, well, how do you know that it's not a bribe? And it's kind of like it's like a contract, a contingency, right? So they already know the expectation, and I'm not going to give it to them until after. Cool. Okay, so somebody give me an example of negative reinforcement, but first I'll read the example from the book. So he says, foul smell under the sink, take trash outside, foul smell is gone. So we're in an aversive situation. We're like, ew, it smells in here. Behavior, I take out the trash that I'm guessing is located under the sink. And then now, all of a sudden, hashtag relief, I don't have that aversive stimulus in my environment anymore. So therefore, it increased the behavior of taking out the trash in the presence of a foul smell. So somebody give me a real life example or clinical example, whatever you want, of negative reinforcement.
Okay, I'll give you one. So the other day I had a headache, really bad headache. So I was taking like 3 Tylenols per day to just get rid of the headache. That to me is negative reinforcement because I'm adding the Tylenol to remove that headache.
Yes, but I would not say that you're adding the Tylenol because then you're going to confuse yourself by using that language. So yes, you took the Tylenol and so then it caused the removal of an aversive stimulus. Because if you put that adding in there, then you might throw yourself off and be like, oh wait, but was it positive because I added? But just look at the consequence. The consequence was relief, right? You were in an aversive situation and then you were able to get some relief. So that's going to be your negative reinforcement.
Okay.
I think we should give more examples on negative reinforcement because that one is so hard for people, especially like in the exam or even as an RBT. It's like they don't understand it and they want to fight you about it. So negative reinforcement is the removal of an aversive stimulus. So let's think about the clinical world. I don't know how many of you guys are in the field already, but what would be an example of me teaching? Jen talked about differential reinforcement earlier, so she probably knows a whole bunch. So differential reinforcement is, okay, I'm going to give this child, I'm going to use differential reinforcement, and I'm going to give them a replacement behavior to engage in order to get access to escape. What would be a good example for that?
Using a break card instead of self-injurious behavior.
Perfect. Yeah. So Jen is going to teach him how to use a break card. So whenever he feels frustrated or like he wants to bang his head on the table, instead, Jen's going to teach him to flash a card that says break. That's the same thing. That's negative reinforcement. She's allowing him an opportunity for access to what he wants, which is to get out of whatever it was that caused the behavior. Maybe Jen placed a demand that it might have been too hard for him. And so he's like, no, thank you. I'm just going to hit my head with this book instead. But us as clinicians, it's our job to teach them differential reinforcement. So we're like, okay, using your BCBA brain, and you're like, okay, what can I do to teach him how to get out of this situation? Another good example that I use a lot is for like clients that are aversive to loud sounds. So let's say other client is screaming, or they're in a room that's way too overstimulating and it's just way too much for them. What I have done is I teach them how to tact their environment. So too loud. So let's say he's like, too loud. Like, okay, so now I'm going to offer him an opportunity to either leave the room or I'll present his noise canceling headphones. So now I gave him that that negative reinforcement, which is the relief of that too loud environment. Erica says, in my classroom, my students can use their points to buy or skip time to escape 10 minutes of a task. Oh, that's cool. So Erica, you're in a classroom setting as a BCBA or as an RBT? ABA classroom as a teacher. Cool. I need to hang out more with you guys because I don't really have those classroom type examples. All of my stuff is going to be clinical. So I love to hear that. So she's going to give her class a point system. And once you get a certain amount of points, you get to leave reading time for 10 minutes or something like that. Yeah, that's a good example. And then Olga says, what about the speeding tickets? So speeding tickets has become like a controversial example in the ABA community. Oh yes, I think you're right, because they added the speeding ticket, but it removed money out of your pocket, right? Because you had to pay $250 fine. So yes. Wait. Hold on, somebody help me out with that example. The speeding ticket one. So
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a response cost. Everybody talked about the speeding ticket one.
Yeah. Don't even use that example. People always are like fight over that example because they're like, well, they added the ticket to decrease the behavior. So then it's actual, some people say that it's positive punishment. Yeah, let's just not go there.
Okay. It confuses me too, yeah.
Yeah, just skip the speeding ticket example. Because then some people are like, well, it removed money from your pocket and decreased the behavior, so then it becomes negative punishment. We just won't go there. So we don't confuse ourselves.
So I Googled it, but I don't know if Googling is a good thing. So it says, they would say, wait, here are some examples that are, you have experienced positive punishment. They say it's positive punishment, but negative punishment would be like children are fighting over a toy.
So did the fact that he gave you that piece of paper punish your behavior? Or was it the fact that you removed $250 from your bank account that punished the behavior? Was it the piece of paper that he added, or was the removal of your money? So that's the part where people are like, Oh, well, then it has to be negative punishment.
Yeah, this doesn't really, it doesn't go into saying that it removed money out of your account, so right.
Yeah, so definitely people used to use that example before for positive punishment, but then it became like controversial whether like maybe it's negative. So we'll just
Drop it.
yeah.
What about children fighting over a toy though? So that's, okay.
They're fighting over a toy,
They're saying that that's negative punishment.
but what happens to the toy?
Yeah, that's what I was always taught that you need to know what the future, is it, what the future
Future
situation.
frequency of behavior.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
So if
I
they're
would need to
removing a
know.
toy, then they're decreasing, removing something, the behavior's decreasing. So it would be negative punishment, right? I'm confused.
I guess it depends what the example is. Like, is it a wanted toy or is it an unwanted toy? We would need, I would say, needs more information.
Right. Yeah, no, sometimes they don't give you all the information. You're right. That could be the answer, right? Right.
Okay, let's see. Alicia said principal ends the meeting early and now you can engage in a preferred theme. Is it negative reinforcement since we are removing something you don't like to engage in something more likable? Or am I just understanding negative reinforcement wrong? So you had to be in an aversive situation, which was your meeting. And then he says, all right, you guys, you get to leave 10 minutes early, hashtag escape, hashtag relief. So yes, I would say that that one is a good example of negative reinforcement. You're like, woo, party. So you were able to escape that aversive situation, your meeting, and now you can go drinking or do something else. Yeah. Okay, I think we're getting the negative reinforcement. Do you guys want another example or are you good to move on to positive punishment? I'm good. Okay. So we'll go on to positive punishment. So punishment, we're going to be reducing a behavior. So in this example in the book, they say icy road. So I engage in the behavior of driving at a normal speed and I crash into the car ahead of me. Dang. So they punished my behavior of driving at a normal speed. So now in the presence of an icy road, am I going to drive at a normal speed or not drive at all? I think that's a weird example, but I guess what they're trying to say is that you saw an icy road, oh, drive slower. That's what it would be, right? Instead of driving at a normal speed, you're gonna drive slower. Okay, I got it. So they punish the behavior of me driving at my normal speed. Now when I see an icy road, I'm going to drive slower because last time I encountered the consequence of crashing. So now I'm going to try to avoid that behavior, active avoidance. So cool. Anybody want to give an example of positive punishment in real life, in the school setting, in a clinic setting? So positive.
Oh, I was gonna give one.
Okay.
So, when I was a little girl going to school back in Jamaica, we used to, and it's just, our culture, we used to, if you were late, you had to join a late line. And if you're late, you would get like a swat on the butt.
Okay.
Then go to class. So that decreased my behavior of being late. So I would run as fast as I can to not get to school late because I wanted to avoid that punishment.
Yeah, that's perfect. So she is saying she was trying to avoid the spanking. So she's now going to, it punished that behavior of arriving late. So now she's going to change her behavior and start arriving on time. Oh, I have a good example of negative reinforcement that one of my like BCBA mentors gave me for herself. She was like, positive reinforcement wasn't working, punishment wasn't working to get her to work out. And so she really found it aversive when other people ridiculed her. So like social, I don't know what you would call it. So like negative social attention.
Socially mediated,
Yeah.
mediated, yeah, negative.
Yeah, like a socially mediated consequence. So she was trying to figure out, okay, what do I really, really hate? And so she said that she hated for people to like look at her or ridicule her, being in those awkward social situations. So she set a contingency for herself that if she didn't work out like 4 times a week, she would have to go to the Galleria. We live in Houston. She would have to go to the Galleria wearing a sign that said, "I'm a fat pig," or something like that, something crazy. And so in order to avoid that consequence, she didn't want that situation. She worked out. So I always thought that was a really funny example. So what do you guys think that would be?
Positive punishment, because she's adding the ridiculeness to decrease her not working out. I'm so confused right now.
I think it would be negative reinforcement because she's trying to avoid that aversive situation. So remember we talked about active avoidance or escape. So she's not necessarily in that aversive situation, but she knows that she possibly could be. So she is trying to avoid the ridicule. And so then it increases the behavior of her working out. Right? Does that make sense? Or did I just make it more confusing?
It's all confusing sometimes if you overthink it.
Yeah, don't overthink it. We'll just go on to the next one.
I think I have a good one for positive punishment though, if you want to hear.
Okay.
It's from The Office. So if you watch The Office, you'll laugh. So in one of the episodes, Michael wants to grill bacon in his bed with his, so he takes his George Foreman grill and grills the bacon in his bed, but he accidentally burns his foot in the process of doing it.
Oh yeah.
So now he's not going to do that anymore because he broke his foot.
Yeah, that's perfect. So now it punished the behavior of grilling in your bed. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so negative punishment. So now we're going to remove some type of stimulus to decrease a behavior. So in this example in the book, it says pop-up box asks, warn when deleting unread messages. What does that mean? Click on no. Important email message is lost. Can somebody explain that to me? I don't understand. So the pop-up
It's
box.
those little pop-up boxes that come up on like when you're doing web browsing or even on social media, there's just too many of them. And say you click no, but then the system crashed or something. And so now you've lost all your emails. So now you're like, oh, I guess I'm not gonna click on all of them.
Oh yeah, I do that all the time, where you just like click on everything and then you accidentally like do something wrong. Okay, I see where they're going with that. So the removal of some type of wanted stimulus. So the wanted stimulus was my emails. So they removed my emails when I accidentally clicked on that no button. So they punish that behavior of clicking no. So now in the future, I'll click yes so that it doesn't delete my messages. I think I got it. Okay. Who can tell me what contingent is? That's like a ABA word that you're going to use all for the rest of your life.
Functional relation.
Yeah, I always, oh, it even says it here. Contingency refers to dependency of. I always think of this depends on this. Yeah, Erica says dependent on something or some action. Yeah, so a contingency is like a unspoken contract. So if this, then this. So this is dependent on this.
Or part of.
Part of. Can you explain?
Like that it's a part of this or a part of that, like it's contingent or part of it.
Yeah, and then Erica says if then statements. Yeah, perfect.
Right.
What's another word for if then?
Grandma's law.
Yes, AKA grandma's law, AKA one more.
The Premack principle.
Premack.
Yes, perfect. I'm all about the AKAs. I don't know if you guys have noticed. Okay. What about rule governed behavior and contingency shaped behavior? What did you guys learn about the difference between somebody who is rule governed versus somebody who is contingency based?
So rule govern is, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So rule govern is someone who follows the law or whatever's written that is required to be in compliant, whereas contingency based is my kids that will actually do something like touch the hot stove even after they're told not to and learn the hard way.
Yes, perfect. So I always point out to people like those people who are rule governed are like those people that follow the rules regardless of whether they have ever come into contact with the consequence. They just know that they don't want to come into contact with the consequence. And so they're like strong-willed. They're like, I'm not going to engage in that behavior.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I'm not going to engage in that behavior because I've heard that it's bad, or because I've seen somebody else do it and I don't want to be a part of that. So that's rule governed, and that's a more advanced skill. So for a lot of our lower functioning kiddos, rule governed type things don't work for them. So that's why you always want to start with those contingency based. And like she was saying, like your kids, you can tell them all day long, don't do that or you're going to get your heart broken. Don't do that or you're going to whatever all day long. But until they actually come into contact with the contingency, then they probably are just going to do it anyway because they're your kids and they don't listen.
history of reinforcement or consequence, versus contingency. Contingency has reinforcement and a consequence attached to it or associated with it.
Yes, perfect. I think we're done with chapter 2. What do you guys think? Anybody have any questions on chapter 2 or want to go any deeper into it?
Yes,
We talked about, oh, go ahead.
about contingency. She said it has reinforcement with also with consequence.
Yes, so they have to encounter the consequence either through reinforcement or punishment. So they have to have come into contact with it because they're contingency based or contingency shaped behaviors, versus the rule governed person. They never came into contact with the consequence. They just know if you speed, you'll get a ticket. So they always go at the speed limit. But let's say me, I'm contingency shaped and I actually want to see the ticket and I'm going to speed to work because I like those extra 10 minutes of sleep or something like that. So it's just the difference between, did they come into contact with it, or can somebody just tell Selena not to speed and she'll do it? Just depends on, I guess, what type of learner she is.
Okay. Thank you.
Who is rule governed? Jen is rule governed.
Definitely.
I think I'm more of a rebel. I got to come into contact with the consequence. But hey, more power to you. You probably get to work on time too and don't speed.
Pretty much.
Angelica says a little bit of both. Erica says we are all in some aspect. Yes, sometimes you just gotta test your boundaries. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, anybody else have any more questions on rule governed behavior, contingency shaped behavior? I think we finally finished chapter 2. That was pretty fun. The basic concepts and principles. Chapter 3 is going to go on to selecting and defining target behaviors. So that is going to be really fun. Probably going to go into operational definition. Oh, it's going to go into ABC recording. Ooh, reactivity. Who knows what reactivity is? It happens a lot as a VCBA. You'll see it.
You act differently when you know you're being like observed or something.
Yeah, you're being watched.
Yes, it happens so much. So that's why sometimes I like to do blind evaluations, like through the cameras or something, just because people do change their behavior because they know that their BCBA is watching. So sometimes I just randomly like to look on the camera or just kind of peek in, and that way you see the real behavior or how they really are. But the same thing happens in assessments. So we don't always get the most accurate data in your initial assessment because they know they're being watched. They know that they're being assessed. So they might act differently in their first assessment and you're like, oh yeah, he engaged in no behaviors. And then his first day of ABA, you're like, oh my gosh, he does this and this and this and this and this. Now nobody's watching, nobody's with the clipboard taking data. So yeah, reactivity is always a fun one. Well, it's 7:30. Do you guys, I'll pause the recording, and if you guys have any